Hello, Bradley Viking here, and as many know, I'm obsessed with Stephanie Meyer's novel Midnight Sun, which is Twilight from Edward's point of view. I think both because this novel took a long time to come out, literally, like she even says in the forward, 15 years. It's more like 12, but it still is the fact that it took time to develop, and I think she's able to grow as a author and as a person. And like, there's some legitimately good prose, and I think all of her stuff has been that I have read. Admittedly, I've only read the Twilight series. I haven't read like The Host or anything. Has been competently written, and the fact that like I've read some just amateur stuff that is just like, did you ever go to a language arts class? I don't know, right? This is perfectly legible. You get a clear idea of the action. You know what's going on. It's more just the ideas is what we have problems with. Sometimes the dialogue's a bit silly. Sometimes the characters are taking actions that don't make much sense. But I think the writing is overall competent in terms of conveying what's going on in the story and the ideas. And actually, I think if Meyer embraced the fact that she's a pretty good horror writer, she could go far because honestly, she can do some creepy stuff. Probably her most creepy stuff is unintentional, but that's okay. So Midnight Sun, I enjoy it. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying I'm enjoying it. Right? It's a guilty pleasure. So we're gonna go into chapter one, First Sight, and I already listened to it. I love the audiobook. I think Luke from the Percy Jackson movies, that's the dude narrating, should do more narrating because he's actually really good at it. Um, so the first bit is Edward in high school comparing it to purgatory. He claims it's the only time he wishes he could sleep just to like get through the day. Which honestly, as someone who just works some really dull jobs, like I feel you when it's especially with his enhanced, like we get him very clear very quickly, like the enhanced senses and everything, like an idea of that. We do get a pretty good idea of like just how alien he is pretty quick, like the way he kind of his thoughts work, how he thinks about humans. You get a much clearer idea than in Twilight, just how different the vampires are from human beings, how they are like these other creatures, right? And Edward even kind of lampshades out that like human senses are dull, that they could even kind of fit in when in his eyes the humans and the vampires are so radically different. How they ever like it's only that humans are have such less perception, like their eyes aren't as clear and they can't hear as nice, and they're all kind of dumb in comparison to him. That is the only reason they can even try to fit in. But the first thing we really get is the um, as he's staring in cracks in the ceiling in the cafeteria is a description of his mind reading that he's trying to tune it out. But it is pretty clear. So most of it is like that humans are still beneath him. And we do get like this sense of an elitism from him. That and it is why it's kind of hard to ever Edward does never come across as a 17-year-old. Like yeah, he was changed to 17, but like he's never felt 17. He comes across much closer in both versions of the story, Twilight or Midnight Sun. He comes closer to the 104-year-old man that he is. But yeah, just like looking down on, he's like, I'm trying to know, but it made pretty clear that the mind reading, it's not, you can't just shut it on and off. It is like hearing, right? You can't just not hear things. You can try to tune things out and not pay attention to them, but you're still hearing things. And he tries to tune out his family out of courtesy, try to give him some privacy, but it's even though he then immediately describes what each one of them is thinking, and that they're all just kind of used to it at this point, so they try not to think anything too embarrassing, but it's also like, how much can you really control that? So they just kind of accept it. I don't know, it's sort of like if you had someone who had x-rayed eyes and they could just see through your clothing, you're like, whatever. It's just like, after a while, you just like, I guess this is what it is now. But it would just be annoying that, yeah, like, you have that one dude in the room who always knows that, like, oh yeah, no, it was me that farted, or, man, I think that so-and-so is a jerk. Um, Although his disdain of the humans, like, right away, he's just like, oh, there's a new girl at school, and everyone is excited about it. It's like, I don't know, like, it's a small town. Okay, that kind of thing is kind of exciting in a small town when there's only a couple hundred people at the school total. They said several hundred, but there's definitely references like, Forks is small, the school is small, so one new person would be quite a bit different. It's half the sheep-like males were already imagining themselves infatuated with her, just because she was something new to look at. Yeah, and then we quickly get exposition of the family. Basically, Rosalie is super vain, and like literally, she sees her reflection in eyeglasses, and she's all like, "I'm in love with me." Um, Emmett is Emmett honestly comes across quite likable. You know, Esme is Rosalie is shallow, but as Emmett's just all surface. He even says if Rosalie's mind was a stagnant pool, Emmett's was a lake with no shadows, glass clear. But it's just like I appreciate the idea of someone who is so fundamentally honest and straightforward that he wouldn't think something they would not say aloud or put into action. Like, true, you may want to be a more complex individual, but it's sort of like that's kind of neat. Somebody who's just kind of so straightforward that they're like, I'm gonna do me, and yeah, like most things, I'm gonna kind of put my mind to, and gonna like either say it or do it. I mean, you could also say he doesn't have a filter, and and it's just a lot of fun because also he doesn't really think or do anything that's like all that harmful, except for like he makes some crude jokes. I can get behind that. But we do get that he's straightforward and he's massive. And that he's very physical because it's one enormous hand to his opening curls and then fuming about a wrestling match. And Jasper was suffering. Which is funny because we get kind of cut off from Jasper suffering, like what? And then we have Alice and Edward have a great telepathic, one of their legendary telepathic conversations, which is, it's kind of neat that over the years, they've definitely worked out a system. So Edward makes subtle signs while Alice just thinks things at him. And then, so he responds to it. And then she just pays attention. And then, like, but it has to be super subtle because, like, vampires have super senses. So to keep it secret from Rosalie and Emmett, mostly Rosalie and Emmett, like, maybe a bit from Jasper, but, like, and that their first indicator of something else with Jasper is that he's sitting way too perfectly still, which is like it's a neat detail with Meyerpires, is that their natural state is just to be absolutely still, and it does help set them off as something other, as something alien, because people are never still. We're always like fidgety or something. I mean, people even like when they're asleep you'd be dead to the world, and like from a distance, like, oh yeah, you're not moving because you're asleep, but like, your chest moves as you breathe. People tend to move in their sleep. Like people are always moving. But you know what are really good at being still is ambush predators. So I think maybe it was either the stone thing that they're kind of made of stone, so that's why they naturally are still if they don't think about it, and they have to consciously do like little ticks. You even see me moving around with my hands and like moving my hands behind, because yeah, people don't do well being still. And I think that's a nice characteristic. That's the thing. Is many people have said that like Stephanie Meyer's world building, sure, it doesn't all make sense, but it's interesting, and all the side characters are interesting, and the mains are boring. And like really, in terms of world building, like the we all I stand with LGBT. I stand with the trans community. I do not agree with like what Rowling has said, but let's face it, we all really liked Harry Potter for a while. We all criticized the world building in that. We're like, no, the Harry Potter world, however you feel about it now, never really made sense. But darn, it was fun. Like we kind of had fun. It was a world we could work with, even though we're like, okay, yeah, the math's all wrong here. This would never work. So basically, Jasper is kind of thinking like, man, I want to drink some blood because he's the newest to their way of life. That said, I'm trying to remember the exact like. There's an official Twilight timeline and there is something, but it's definitely my cat's asking for attention. So this is Prince Hillary interrupting the video. Hillary, you're right in front of the camera, and he's gonna run away now because he hates being picked up. That's it. Find your place to cuddle. But he just likes walking across keyboards. He is a cat. So I do think it's more a stone thing about them. But anyways, Jasper, I think has been part of the family since about the 60s, actually. Live looking up the official Twilight timeline. While we wait for Google to load, he's basically battling the temptation to not drink blood, and I mentioned it's been 2 weeks since their last hunting trip, and that's kind of like the edge of their limits. Like the rest are kind of cool with it; they can handle it, but their eyes are now black. And Jasper, though, is just like, man, I really want to drink some blood. Okay, it says, oh, Alice and Jasper joined the Olympic Coven, according to the Twilight Saga wiki, in 1950. This story takes place in 2005, so he's been 55 years living with the Cullens. Jasper had been trying the vegetarian lifestyle since at least 1948 when he met Alice. So it's been 55 years, like, dude. How... It's not that... Because I think Emmett was only born in the 30s. Yeah. Okay, Emmett was changed in 1935. Rosalie was changed in 1933. So they only got, 15, 20 years on them for control. And yet Jasper's the one who's all, out of control and constantly wanting to drink people. Maybe it's because, for give or take 100 years, because he turned in 1860, you can scroll. 1863, he's turned. So just shy of 90 years, call it 80, 85 years. I know there's an exact number there, but he's basically drinking human blood, right? Because he leaves them in the 1938, he lives that coven, so it's actually 75 years. He is straight just drinking blood from humans until he finally leaves that coven because he feels really bad because he can feel the emotions, as we know from the Twilight series. But he's still like, oh man, I want to drink people. Like, I don't know why we made Jasper the weak one. Yeah, he has far more experience drinking people, but they've all. Alice is the only one we. Alice and Rosalie are the only ones that we were pretty sure haven't actually like drank human blood. Like Edward for 4 years was eating people. Emmett's had the occasional slip up. Rosalie went on a murder spree, but apparently she didn't drink them. It's hard to say. We know she didn't drink Roy's, her ex-friend, so she might have drank like his buddies. It's kind of vague. She makes statements of like, I got a cleaner record when it comes to like drinking human blood, but she's also killed a lot of people. So, yeah, this is one of the parts that's not clear. Like, why exactly? How like a 15, 20 year advantage in terms of the vampire thing? Maybe it's just because she was drinking human blood longer. Regardless, first Edward's like, no, he's struggling, but like, he's not really gonna kill anyone. But then a girl comes, and it's literally said a small girl. Like, they really do, especially in the early chapters, infantilize the high school students as being children, which makes sense when the youngest of them, Emmett, right? I think he was like 20 something, 70 years ago. So he's 90 some now. Right, Edward's 104. So it is kind of nuts. Yeah, that it is that awkwardness of like they are all adults, and they definitely read more as like their older selves than as like teens. They don't ever come across as teens in my mind. You disagree? It's fine. So Jasper's like basically envisioning like eating her, and Edward has to kick his chair and stop him, and then kind of like sets and at least like lets Jasper reset his head. And the Alice's conference like, no, I saw the future and I saw you weren't gonna do anything. And Edward's basically like, no, that's full of shit. He was totally gonna eat her if I hadn't done anything. And it's kind of funny how it's also this contrast of Edward will say, oh yeah, the humans naturally avoid us because they instinctually know like we're dangerous, but then sometimes they'll just be oblivious and they'll just like walk right past us, like get up close and just not even realize like we could kill him at any moment. And at least he does in our description of like the dry ache in his throat, the sense of a human, just like the normal thing, which he's like, normally I can resist. A little harder when Jess wants to eat her too. That said, I do wonder if it's like an instinctual like you give me the heebie-jeebies, so I stay away with you, or the fact that like really when you get down to it, and we kind of see it in the movies, like they look weird, and there are like rumors throughout the school like, oh yeah, like their dad does like weird plastic surgery on them, or they're all aliens or something. Like people don't think they're vampires, but people definitely know something strange about the Cullens. Right? They definitely don't fit in. They definitely come across weird. So I don't know if it is like, I think Edward's thinking too highly of like the instinctual aversion to danger as opposed to let's just stay away from the weirdos. Like the uncanny valley is a thing when people are acting off. You see when they change like your CGI face and you're like, well, it's off. And as much as Edward's like, oh, people are clueless, like we spend a lot of time looking at faces, and especially the unnatural stillness. Like they have to deliberately do the gestures, but if they were being unnaturally still, like that would actually really set people off. People like, nope, you are. That's not right. It would creep people out and keep them away. But that's also why they deliberately, fidget and stuff so that they defy notice. It is pretty funny that Alice has the line. It helps. It helps if you think of them as people. Alice suggested. What, like humans aren't people? And then she lists the details. Her name is Whitney. She's the baby sister. Her mother invited her to the garden party. It's actually some nice little details that come up. Like, oh, do they actually like engage in social activities in the town with the people? Because this is a bit like, although Alice does come across as someone who would just know all the small town gossip, just because. Not even like Edward would learn it just because he's like, oh, I need to know if someone like is onto the Cullens. As Alice, the party planner, comes across as someone who would just know all the little like details about people just because that would interest her, like how your mom just knows all knows everything. At least my mom is always like, oh yeah, and it's this person, and they're married to that person, and they have the kid, and they're going to college off in here, and oh, yeah, that's what my mom's like. And Alice kind of has that energy since Esme has the recluse shut-in energy, but we're not on to Esme yet. But we do get a good sense of Alice's character and her relationship to Edward. It's actually very sweet. Like we learn more about it, and I do really appreciate the brother sister relationship Alice and Edward has. He's pretty standoffish with Rosalie and Jasper. Although Jasper still gets some cool moments, and even Rosalie gets a couple moments. But I don't think it's a coincidence that Rosalie and Jasper go by Hale when they're out among the humans, and Alice and Emmett go by Cullen because he is very much closer to Emmett and Alice, as we'll see later on. So, right. Wow, those 20 minutes just that setup. That's just setting up our people. And that we're vampires and we want to eat people. Now he hears Jessica Stanley's voice, and it's sort of like if someone thinks Edward, he's like, ooh, which is the same as the crowded room. Someone just says your name, like, what? Same thing. And he finds out that, and that's where he finally actually gets a look at Bella. And from across the room, he's just like, unremarkable girl, whatever, humans beneath me. Until he figures out, like, it takes him a minute to clue in, like, oh, I can't read her thoughts. And and it's actually really funny when he, like, tries to read her thoughts. Because he's like, I don't actually know how to do this. Because I've never had to. Because he's never had to, like, work at his mind reading before, really. Except for, like, maybe when he's, focusing it on a specific voice that he's heard before. But on a voice he's never really heard before, so he doesn't really... It's sort of like when he's, like, he's trying to, like, listen harder, and he's like, how do I do this? And then he briefly thinks, like, oh, man, am I the problem? I can't read her mind, like... He completely disregards the fact that there's anything special about Bella that would keep him from reading her mind. He immediately goes into, maybe I'm having some kind of degradation, like my powers are going away. And then he actually has a moment, like, it's funny because at the beginning of the chapter he's lamenting how annoying it was to be able to read minds. But then, as soon as it's the idea that it would be going away, it's like, no, I need my mind reading, like... It's part of who I am. Like, who would I be without this? And that's fair. Like, I think we've all been there where it's like we have traits and stuff or things that we don't highly value. But, like, who would I be? Like, I'm so used to that. Who would I be? I can't think of anything that I can relate to right now. This is not the part of the book where, like, Edward's very relatable. He actually comes across as, like, just an ass. Just how much he downplays, like, human beings. And again, it's just the whole, like, why are they even in high school? Why do they even, like, I get Carlisle wants to be among people because he wants to go be a doctor. That's fair. Also, why even document, like, I guess they need some form of documentation so they could be buying cars and stuff. And Alice in her clothes. But yeah, as many suggested before, they could be bumming around college for years and years, and if they're just doing that, like, no one's gonna get that suspicious of them not growing older. Like, as a justification, if they start younger, then they can keep going for a bit. They can go on for longer in one area without people getting suspicious of them not growing older. I mean, really, it's like you age more noticeably when you're younger, like, 16 to 20, like, your physical development's much more noticeable. It's supposed to, like, 20, 25, like, if you don't age as noticeably, and I don't think people really notice as much. My 2 cents. And yeah, but, and that this story could have just worked as well in college. Yeah, if it was just college or university, I think a lot of this story would have worked a bit better. But it's like a bit clearer. But many fans have said that before, so we know. But yeah, high school drama, because why would our prime, 12 to 18-year-old audience that we're really aiming for, right? This young adult audience, why would they want to read about college things? Which, actually, that's fair. That is fair. So, points to Meyer for that part of, like, at least I know the demographic I'm at. I love really, like, Meyer has weird age things in her books that other people explored. We're not exploring chapter 1. Okay, so first Edward's worried that, like, he's losing his mind. Then he's like, no, I'm gonna, like, figure out how to read her brain, and it won't be a problem. But I'm gonna, like, figure it out, and then it's gonna be like, there's nothing worthwhile in her thoughts. And he remarks that, like, Jessica used to have a crush on him, and he's glad she's moved on, and now she's into Mike Newton, even though, like, Mike is completely unexceptional. Is lame. He's like, yeah, the generically popular Mike Newton. Whatever. They both suck, so, like, he doesn't even, like, hope they can be happy together. He does, like, kind of read the thoughts around her, and it is, like, everybody's kind of like, oh, Bella, like, what would you like, New Girl? And they're all reacting to New Girl. She's a new special thing. Yeah, it's a bit like, maybe because I've never been in a town that small. But it does seem funny that, yeah, it's like all folks know. Then he goes to biology. Bella comes to biology, and at first, like, oh no, poor thing. She's gonna have to sit next to me because there's no available desk. Then he gets her sent, and that is where there's legit some decent writing. Oh, yeah. He does briefly worry about, like, if I can't read her thoughts, like, how will I know if she's on to us? And Emmett kind of teases, like, is she afraid of us yet? But we do love the bit where she walks in, the vent blows her hair. That was actually nicely done how they did exactly in the movie. The vent blows her hair, and then that's just her scent getting to Edward. Her scent hit me, like, even though it's like, really, if their senses are so powerful, do you really need, like, it blown directly to you? Could you just pick up the scent products in there? Whatever. Her scent hit me like a battering ram, like an exploding grenade. There was no image violent enough to encompass the force of what happened to me in that moment. Instantly, I was transformed. I was nothing close to the human I'd once been. No trace of shreds of humanity I've managed to cloak myself in over the years I reigned. I was a predator. She was my prey. There was nothing else in the whole world but that truth. There was no room full of witnesses. They were already collateral damage in my mind. The mystery of her thoughts was forgotten. Her thoughts meant nothing, for she would not go on thinking them much longer. I was a vampire, and she had the sweetest blood I'd smelled in more than 80 years. And yeah, he actually, that was already quite a bit. It actually goes on for quite a bit longer of how, like, dramatic it is, like, even though he's been abstaining from human blood for over 70 years, he's just like, I want this. And yeah, like it comes across pretty dark. It's like, da, 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 da. It's kind of creepy with like when you get clear. Oh yeah, these are vampires. There's actually a decent sense of creepiness I noticed. Of I'm like, oh, the small girl and Jasper like about to strike, and even Edward's sort of disregard for all of them. Like, oh yeah, they're insignificant lives. It's like if Jasper did actually kill one of them, it's like you wouldn't even be really all that put out. So you guys have to lay low for a while because of murder. And just how it's like, yeah, they'd be in less danger if there's a whole bunch of tigers here. That's like, okay, you guys, yeah, from Edward's point of view, like they're just like always ready to strike. And now we have it where he's like, oh no, this is the blood that this be worth it. And I was thinking about, blood drinking as a metaphor for sex. It's like, oh, so now we found the girl hot enough. Okay, it doesn't line up perfectly. Whatever. Moving on. I do love this part where he's like, oh, yeah, found it. You're the one. This is not a full second had passed when he's already like plotting to just murder the entire room just to get for Bella. There's one name bit. So first he's like, and he goes through like he spends pages over various murder plots. Talk about an exciting first chapter of how he's like first he's like, the gut reaction, go kill her. Oh shit, you have to deal with the witnesses. And how it's like, oh man, it would take time and it would get messy, and then they attract attention that I have to kill the people who would respond. And I like he describes like this separate entity of the monster and himself, and like so as much as he's just like, oh man, it'd be like this huge disaster, the monster in him was like, oh, and her blood would cool. Although it's like, how much would it cool? Like body temperature only goes down, if I remember correctly from CSI, about like 1 degree per hour. Like dead bodies cool pretty slowly. Like unless he does just rip out her throat, and I guess the blood like coming out would cool faster. The blood, lost from her body. Yeah, that would cool faster. But like, he then goes on. Okay, no, I have to eliminate the witnesses first, and he says he can snap 4 or 5 necks per second and kill, right, approximately 20. I think he said 19 students and 1 teacher. I think he continually calls them children, which does come across like a bit weird. It's a bit off-putting because he also calls like Bella a child a lot when it's like, we know they're going to be in a romance. So that comes off weird. And then, but yeah, the killing the whole room 5 seconds. So it's like if he could, and that is admittedly like I take off, I start stealthing them from the back, take them down the right. These tactics. And this was, I remember the sample chapter was out before Breaking Down Part 1 was out. Because I remember remembering that when the girls were all giggling in the theater when I took my stepsister. I was like, oh man. Like, I can't move as fast as Edward, but like, how many could I take out before people notice me? And so if Edward can kill like the entire room in 5 seconds, like, I don't think, starting from stealth, so he'd have massive speed advantage. But yeah, even in a messier where he has to corral them when they're trying to like run away and escape. Like he's so fast, right? When he starts, like a human eye can't perceive his movement. And he's so strong, he just kind of has to smack one and they're dead. Like he doesn't. It's not like he has to like strike them multiple times. I'm pretty sure even an adult man, like full power blow from a vampire in this world would just kill them right off. Like if you got hit by a wrecking ball. You're not coming back from that. So even if it was like draw more witnesses have killed him, like I don't think, like, again, if he's that fast, like I don't think it's gonna take him more than like a few minutes. So I don't know how much the blood's actually gonna cool here. I'm not sure even congeal. All right, like human bodies are hot. Yeah, if it was like we might cool off a few droplets of blood, but I think even if like she's pumping out some stuff, like unless you're like that really annoying person who needs like your French fries freshly made because it needs to be burning hot. I'm like, I don't know, like they already burned my mouth if I try to eat them right away. I don't know how freaking hot you need them. It's like maybe Edward is like that finicky about it. He needs it like right hot. Cause yeah, although there's also a lot where he's just kind of like messing with his own brain, so he's kind of making rationalizations to the temptation to kill her, just to keep himself thinking, just to delay it. Because he's like, well, I've held myself for 70 years. Like, I can hold out for another hour. And he's like, it's sort of like when you're doing cardio. Like, well, if I've done it for 1 hour, maybe 2. I was like, well, I've kept going for 5 minutes. What's another 5 minutes? And it's like, okay, well, if I can hold for 1 hour, I can hold for 2 hours. He's like, just get out of here. Of course, he only is able to kind of clear his brain because he gets like a fresh waft of air from a moving of folders. And then he's able to clear his head just enough that he doesn't instantly go murder the classroom. Because like right away he's like, okay, I'm going to murder her. No, shit, no, that'd be too messy. Okay, I'm going to murder this entire classroom in 5 minutes and then I'm going to kill her. Like, he's just going to go till he gets like the fresh air that's essentially like a wake-up slap in the face. So that's fun. It's pretty fun. And then he gets that. Then he is able to kind of like... Yeah, there's some dirty, dirty metaphors I can think of here. But the clears that enough that he has like a vision of Carlisle's adopted father. We do get... This is the first real description of Carlisle we get. And how much Edward like respects and admires him. And I mean, I do think it's cheesy how, Edward has like the vision of, so first he envisions like his face when he was being a vigilante vampire and hunting and eating humans, and how he looked like now, because it's a bit like the dark side. It changed you physically. Mostly it changed your eyes. Blood red eyes from human blood, and then golden eyes from animal blood, which honestly doesn't make any sense, but it's all magic at this point, so who cares? And then black eyes if you're just out of blood. So because he gets a bit of a wake-up call, but it's funny how he gets a wake-up call, but the temptation is still too much, so he has to play mind games with himself to rationalize it, but he does like think of like, oh man, like Carla would be disappointed. Like he'd still be like, you're my son, I love you and everything, but he would be disappointed. And yeah, like that's like the biggest feeling. It's like, no, it's like letting my father down. I do think it's cheesy how he's like, he's not my real father, so we don't really share much alike, except for like, the physical traits that all vampires have, being pale, corpse pale, and not looking quite human, and then the golden eyes that they share because they both drink the animal blood. But yeah, Dan and cheesy with like, but I like things over the years, like the mark of his patience on my brow, yada yada yada. I'm like, ugh. So that's my ugh moment of the book. It's like, yes, I've picked up traits from him. Which also flies in the face of, because it's supposed to be vampire canon that their personalities are supposed to be locked when they're changed, and they don't really develop, even though, like, clear, right there, chapter 1, that is bullshit. Because he clearly does. He clearly says, like, that he has grown and he's learned from Carlisle and that he has changed over the years. Like, yeah, he's still Corley Edward, but like it's how we all like grow and change over time. You know, learn more compassion, more patience, my other things. And again, it's why he never comes across as a teenager. So then he's just like kind of doing it, and like plotting's like, oh, maybe I'll walk her to her next class, and find. Oh, and he. Oh, it is an interesting bit where he realizes, right, I don't need to breathe. But it's like, oh, it's not great. So he shuts off his breathing because vampires only breathe really so they can smell and talk. It is a nice detail that I like that Maya remembers, so he has to answer a question, so he uses his last breath to form the words. That, yeah, if you're not breathing, you can't talk, because talking is... This is my cat, by the way, who's interrupting the video. Yes, you are, Hillary. Yes, you are. Why you need to get in front of the camera, I do not know. So that's Prince Hillary. He's great. This is his tail. He loves me. So I do like that Maya remembers the detail that talking is essentially just us moving air past our vocal cords. So when you're not, like, even if you can indefinitely hold your breath, you wouldn't be able to, you'd have like one last breath to kind of talk. I think Edward probably gets away with a few more words than you could realistically do, but whatever. He's also a creature that doesn't need to breathe. Although at least it's like, it's uncomfortable because my body automatically does it. Plus, I have self-preservation instincts that say that we need to breathe. I have self-preservation instincts, and they say I need to be able to smell what's going on, so I'm aware of any possible threat, even though like I rarely come across something as dangerous as I am. Which is funny because like later on there'll be, this chapter does have a lot of irony with the because we know like later he'll meet werewolves and he'll meet hostile vampires. So some things that are supposed to be legitimate threats. Oh, and the lovely sentence of how he's like ironic because Jessica's like the one who takes it to show Bella around, but like is just being a snide bitch in her head. Which honestly is like, I know Jessica was never portrayed as that great in Twilight, but kind of some character assassination to like retroactively like, no, she was thinking much meaner things in her head towards Bella. And that Edward feels like a natural urge to kind of try to protect her. I don't know. It's a bit silly, but yeah, he's like, oh, I don't know. I feel this need to protect her from like Jessica's mean thoughts. It's like it's her thoughts, dude. She'll be fine. But he's like, oh, to think she would ever need protection from thoughts, but I'm literally like planning to murder her to drink her blood. And then, of course, the ironic is I'm the last one who would ever become Bella's protector, because as we know, Edward, of course, becomes her number one protector. So then we get that. Edward, like, runs away to his car when the class is over. Honestly, like, that was a funny bit where Lampshade's like, wait, Alice can see the future. Why isn't she, like, here to help me if she saw me, like, murdering a classroom? Either help me, like, stop me or cover up the evidence. I like how he's like, it's like 50 feet either way. Like, even Alice, who's the one who's... Carlisle's the most interested in humanity. Alice is second, where she's actually interested in humans. And honestly, the rest of them, like, except for Edward's relationship with Bella, like, they don't care about people. It's like, why are they even in school? They can honestly just sign up for homeschooling. They could all just be like, oh, we signed for homeschooling. And Edward even says, like, it was silly to push Jasper's limits. Why have him only, take 2 weeks between meals and then send him in with a bunch of fresh-blooded humans. Like, why are they pushing his limits? When it's like, I mean, yeah, I get like they're all pretty good at it, but except for Jasper. But it's like, yeah, you have more practical situations. You could hunt more often. Like, it's silly to do it. Or again, homeschooling. And they seem to cut class whenever, and they get perfect grades because they already know everything. So yeah, like Edward probably could have just like, and Edward was already kind of freaking out so much. Probably could have just fake sick and like ran out of there and be fine. But no, he goes and like runs away to his car, and then he's like, "Wait, I have another solution. I can." And then he's like, kind of, oh, and then he decides he hates Bella, which is really funny because he's basically acting like such a douche bro. Like, this is where the sexual metaphor comes back in, because he's acting like every dude who's like, man, this chick's so hot, but like I don't think I could do it. Like, I can't have her. Oh, I hate her. You know, it's close like, hey, you know, in her DMs, hey, 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 hey. She respond, you bitch. You know, it's like the girl's too hot, so you must hate her. Edward at least has enough self-awareness to really be like what he really hates himself. And he just hates that, like, because she came into his life, he feels this way. That it's like, although, yeah, it is like this. Like, he's aware it's wrong thinking, but he does at least have the natural thoughts of, man, I had a really good not killing people streak, and now you have to come here and smell really good. And I don't like that. You have to come here and smell really good so that I want to kill and eat you. And, like, the thing is, technically the issue's all his own. But he's like, no, Bella, I hate you, Isabella Swan, for coming in here and smelling so good. But it's like, the problem is that you're attracted to her scent. Yeah, actually, some of this stuff, if you're kind of reading it with a different tone, comes across kind of rapey. Like, that bit. Or when he's, like, suggesting walking her to her next... Because one of his plans, like, oh, I'll ask her to walk her next class. And of course she'll say yes, because it'll be polite. And then we'll just go off the wrong way, and I'll take her off the campus and, like, you know, eat her. Or then later he's plotting to, like, go to her home. And, like, yeah, and the language does come across, like, I mean, it's already creepy because he's, like, planning to murder her. But even, like, the vague way he kind of talks about it is that, like, it could just as easily fit if Edward was just a serial killer. Or whatever. Instead of a vampire. I mean, aren't vampires truly just serial killers who also drink the blood of the victims? So he hates her. He tries to switch classes. It is pretty interesting scene with Mrs. Cope where I love the bit where so he walks in and the instinct walks in. Mrs. Cope's like basically wants to bang him because like he's so hot, but she's like he's too young. He's too young. And eventually Edward's like, actually she's wrong. I'm older than her grandfather. Which is a funny bit. Actually, yeah, and how he's trying to switch classes, and she's like, although she's kind of snide about it, you know, where she's like, well, you're a perfect color, and like as much as she's definitely physically attracted to him, Mrs. Cope, I have questions. But it is like I was like, yeah, we're luring to our prey, so it is this weird contrast where it's like, okay, people are attracted to them. They find them beautiful or drawn in, but they're also instinctually kept away. Doesn't make any sense. But it is. But yeah, that's where we see the vampire charm. Oh yeah, and this listen had a moment. So he tries to charm her so that he can get his way and get just out of the biology class. He tries maybe a physics class, and there's a typo where she says Mr. Banner doesn't like have more than 20 students, but we established Mr. Banner's a biology teacher. He's trying to get out of the class. I think that was supposed to be Mr. Varner. And then he tries to just drop the class, but like, oh, you won't have enough credits. You should talk to your parents. But like before they can find another solution, Bella has to come into the office and he smells her and he has to flee before he eats her. Oh, nice. There's a nice bit where he's just like he plans to smash Mrs. Cope's head into the desk and like right away kill her, and then like, oh sweet, see, this is better. Rather than killing 20 people, I'm only killing 2. I love his self justifications, and honestly, like they go away from murder for the most part, but he just keeps on justifying himself throughout the book, and it's fun. But we do, as much as Mrs. Cope is like enamored with him, she's really like, oh, the perfect Collinsdale. Get every answer right. The teachers think like it's like they found some way to cheat because they're all this advanced school in Alaska. They should all just be in college. Like, why are they even here? Perfect answer, perfect grades, never miss an answer to a question. No, there was something. Oh yeah, when Edward puts the charm out, he says, just gotta look up the exact quote because it's a fun quote. Yeah, about the hate. But yeah, we definitely see like the academic record and her flat brown eyes, which is like because he's already seen Bella's like interesting brown eyes, like her deep brown eyes. So I like the contrast there. Uncomfortable, but I knew how to be charming when I wanted to be. It was easy since I was able to know instantly how any tone or gesture was taken. I mean, if you could read minds, charming people would be a lot easier. But regardless, he goes, not regardless. I could be charming when I wanted to be. And when listening this time, I instantly thought of the scene in Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows, where Harry, he's talking to the Grey Lady and he, Mr. Voldemort, he could be charming when he wanted to be. I was like, oh yeah. This story would be way more interesting if Edward was just straight up the villain. In later chapters, he calls himself the villain in the story, but like, you know, at the end of the day, he's not. But it'd be really interesting if he was. Bella comes in, so he can't stay because he's like losing control. It's a bit interesting of a detail that. So like, he's after being around Bella using up like all his control, he has like just no more control left. So, and he's like, it would be a shame to ruin my like really good streak just killing some rando human just because I was like burnt out mentally. You know what I mean? It's kind of fair. So like, yeah, when you've been resisting something a long time and you're just like ready to crack or you're just like fed up. So he meets with his family briefly and is able to kind of explain most what happens. Alice sees and he flees town. He goes he's driving off. He's gonna go explain to Carla, but then he's gonna flee to Alaska because he's immediately like, which I mean that's fair. If the temptation this great, just get out of there. But also, chapter 1's pretty great. Like it really sets it up. It's a lot more dramatic, with the fact that we know Edward is plotting to kill her. It's kind of creepy when we are going into vampire stuff. We get a much greater sense, like right off, vampires obviously, and how they kind of work. Like we actually have a decent understanding of how there's more details to learn, but it's a pretty good intro. So it's like the first chapter of Trials, like, okay, I showed up and I met some people, and this one guy was weird in bio. This is like, we got murder and intrigue and now Edward's fleeing town. That ultimately doesn't last for very long, but nice little cliffhanger. And this is taking as long as it would have taken just to listen to the first chapter of the audiobook. But you added my thoughts in here. Tune in next time when I do chapter 2.